To become successful is to be finally free. Free of obligation to do work in order to live. Of course, we want to be able to do something that doesn't feel like work, something that's out of our own choice. Sure, we might still have to do something to pay the bills, but let's say what we're doing is something we love doing, something we're passionate about. It becomes our prerogative to do the work or not. Something we want to do anyway, and we're getting paid to do it. That's success. So what we want to do to reach a state of success is increase the things that start us getting towards moving there. Things like increasing our motivation and planning out our goals, and increase the things that keep us going towards success. Having good plans, management, and having steps of accomplishment, so that each step of accomplishment which we take recycles into further motivation. We want to decrease, on the other hand, all the things that prevent us from getting to that state of success, things like fear. I want to talk about one thing. In this presentation, let's consider obstacles. Sometimes we perceive obstacles. Because of the obstacle, we might say, oh, my path is too difficult, and the obstacle itself becomes an excuse of why we are not successful. The problem is that we begin to deny that there's something lacking in us inwardly that we need to overcome, and instead blame an outside condition, which might be outside of control. This is kind of a state of delusion, a state of projecting our self-doubt and limitations as if they were unchangeable parts of the external world, rather than recognizing that the problem is within our control because it is in our perception. For many people, rich people or successful people that might be living in their own bubble of success are very weary of this type of delusion, and seem to think this is a very big and huge problem for why most people do not become successful. Let's say, for example, and not that I have any actual statistical analysis or polling done or anything like that, but let's say of those folks who claim that the obstacles are in the world that are preventing them from being successful, only actually half of them feel that way sincerely, while the other half of them are actually fully fine with where they are in life, but are too shy and insecure to admit that they don't actually want to put in the work to be successful. So they make up the excuse that there are particular obstacles in their life that prevents them from being successful. Now, that's not a delusion. They're simply just lying and saying it's an obstacle, when really they know it's not an obstacle, since they really don't want to be successful in the first place. They're not willing to put in the work. But in our modern success-driven world, it's so shameful to say that one can be happy, settled, or content working with no meaning and barely just getting by, so they make up a lie about this obstacle. But now, of the half, let's say that really do mean that there is an obstacle, I suspect it is a small fraction of them that are actually in a delusional state, as I described earlier. Only that it seems much larger than a small fraction to the successful, rich, privileged, or who are themselves possibly in a bubble. This will be my kind of point here, that it is just as much a state of delusion to deny that there is an obstacle in the real world, and to insist that the blame is in perception. To say that there is no obstacle, it is just in your mind, or even to suggest that the obstacle is not important because everyone has obstacles, is not in line with the modern diaspora of the people. The reason for why this is, I have explained. I have explained the social, political, and economic reasoning behind the push to make it appear like this is the majority of the problem with those who are unsuccessful. And if you want a video on that presentation too, I can do that as well. It becomes the go-to argument to deny that the current political, financial, economic, and legal systems are corrupt, and to deny the actual social obstacles people face. It becomes the veil to the argument that the poor are poor because it's their fault. The blacks are impoverished because they lack motivation. Women don't have the same opportunities because they don't actually seek them. And many other prejudiced arguments that put the blame onto the victims of a bad systems with systematic obstacles and tell them it's all in your head, rather than recognize that there is an actual obstacle in their life and deal with it without trying to deny that there's an obstacle or minimizing it by saying, hey, everyone has them. Hence, denying or minimizing the reality of an obstacle is just as delusional. Not everyone's problems are the same or equal, and the internet generation now makes fun of such a thing with the famous hashtag first world problems. The truth is that both of these states are delusional, and both are actually quite negative. One is seeing an obstacle and reacting with denial to itself, denying itself motivation. One denies itself the idea that they can be successful because they see an obstacle and then put blame on the obstacle. The second one sees an obstacle, or denies rather that there is an obstacle, say there is no obstacle, and again puts blame on the individual. It's your fault that you think there is an obstacle. It's in your perception. Both of these are very negative reactions to the claim that there is an obstacle, whether it's by an individual or by a group. Now, I'd like to talk about a more positive way of reacting to an obstacle, and I have not actually fully thought this way of speaking out yet. I haven't written it out yet, although I am doing so in my own motivational writings, but it goes something along the idea that when one sees an obstacle, they begin to see it not as a negative to deny themselves or to deny that it exists in the world, but to say, yes, it is worthy of me. To say, no, I don't just want an obstacle, I want a great obstacle because I am great. And of course, this kind of mentality and positive thinking when reacting to an obstacle might come from needing motivation first, sort of ego therapy. And it may seem a bit egotistical, but let's do so sincerely. When we see an obstacle, one who has a positive perspective of it does not deny that there is an obstacle and doesn't become unmotivated, but seeing an obstacle, in fact, increases their motivation to go on and overcome that obstacle, to become successful. In fact, the great would not want or perceive success without obstacles. In fact, there is no success without obstacle. The greater the obstacle, the greater the success. So, those with a positive attitude in mind do not deny obstacles. They admit they are there. They admit that they're hard and difficult. And the greater their difficulty that they can admit, the greater their testing themselves, that they get to say, yes, this great obstacle is worthy of me. Sometimes it is actually the case, though, that while we are not delusional into thinking we can't do anything because there's a problem there in the world and we're not capable of doing anything about it, nor are we delusional in denying that there is an actual problem, part of that reality check might be to recognize that the problem is too great for a single individual alone to triumph over and be successful beyond. And so in such cases, we may need to, and there should be no shame, no weakness in joining a team. We are, of course, always going to be and do and accomplish greater as a team than we could as individuals separately. As a team, we can contribute to a goal far greater than the sum of our individual goals. This is something called interdependency. It's spoken about by Stephen Covey and many others, but I like Stephen Covey's way of putting it. There's one step of maturity that goes from being dependent on parents, to being independent, dependent only on yourself. And I think that's where the Western world currently still is. But there is a step after that where even though we can do many things on our own and we don't depend on anyone else for our life or happiness, there are certain great goals and accomplishments we can only achieve when we become interdependent, a part of a team, and for those things we can triumph over even great obstacles that a single individual, no matter how motivated, can triumph over. Lastly, I want to talk about the most extreme and very rare case. It's not very often that this will actually happen, but it is true that there might be such a state where one sees a problem and does know this is a very real problem, not in any sort of delusional state, but the problem is too great even for a community to rise up of and above, because the problem is going to continue to grow. It is only in such a state that we begin to live for something beyond the hedonistic idea of pleasure for ourselves, happiness for ourselves, that the idea of success for ourselves and being happy, doing what we love, will become secondary to something even greater, even more important than that. Duty, truth, justice. This is a state in which we might say in the Sikh religion that one joins the Khalsa, gives up their ideas of what might be happiness for their life, even though they might be a saint and wanting to never harm a single creature, may be forced into warriorhood and kill other human beings. It is because of and for the reasons of truth and justice that we have to sometimes excel beyond the idea of being successful for ourselves and our own pleasure, our own happiness, or our own health. That we have to devote our life and will and all of our passion into defeating the roots of the obstacles in the first place, so that, maybe not in our lives, but at least for our children, or our children's children, may they be able to be free enough to become free, to become successful. Again, that's a very rare and extreme case, but it is still in this case that we do not deny that there is, in fact, an obstacle, nor do we deny ourselves the necessity to move and to do and to go and accomplish, but that success for us may no longer mean doing what we are passionate about. In fact, the end goal may not be the end goal, simply living life truthfully, to duty, honor, and destiny, and to justice and truth, as I've said, may outrank everything else. But again, this is an extreme case, very rare. I'm not saying this happens often. It is just a reality that I want to recognize, because the way I like to do things is try to look at all the possible cases I possibly can and try not to ignore something that I might think is important. Thank you for my presentation on obstacles.